My name is Antoinette Schroeder Bislu, and my parents were Anthony and Margaret Schroeder. My mother's maiden name was Margaret Sufall, and this is her mother, my grandmother, Catherine Sharm Sufall. Her maiden name was Kladensky. I've always known the story of my mom's family's immigration to America. These pictures were hanging on the walls, and my mother was always so excited about her Austrian heritage and her American heritage. Her two favorite songs were the Blue Danube Waltz and God Bless America. So we knew many stories. We were never disconnected by heart, really. But over the years, as you know, obviously when my mom came here, they had a lot of correspondence back and forth. Her oldest brother was stayed in Austria because he, at the time in 1925, my mom was 10, he was about 25. He had a family, he was married, he had children, had a wonderful job that he enjoyed, and so he stayed behind with his family, and the others all came to America. My Grandpa Sufall had a sister here, and she, one by one, sponsored her family to come to America, where times were a little bit better to get jobs and take care of their families. We always knew the stories. Mom was 10, Auntie Ann was 8. They thought the streets were going to be paved in gold. As we grew up, a rumor that America was now a paradise, and money fell from the trees, and my father had a great dream. You know, they were just happy. They're going on a big ship. It's a big adventure. They're going to go see their papa. They weren't aware of all of the hardships that were going on in the background. So they arrived here in America in 1925. My mother was 10, Auntie Ann was 8, her sister Herta was 16, so Herta went off to work, but Margaret and Ann went off to school. They were put in the same grade so that they could learn English together and speak to each other in German. And they were always very close their whole life. And Mom used to tell me, you know, when I was in grade school myself, coming home for lunch, and I would sit at the kitchen table with my mom. And oftentimes she would, you know, talk about, she'd make some tea and pour a little milk in it and say, you know, in Vienna we had 1 quart of milk for the whole week. And here, you know, you can have all the milk you want, she said, but I love having this little bit of milk in my tea to remind me of home. And she would tell me the stories of, again, over and over, how they came here. And one of her stories oftentimes was about her little niece, Berta, and how when her father came to America, the family that was still there in Austria moved in with her big brother, her little niece and nephew, Berta, and, oh gosh, I think it was Joseph. She loved playing with them, and for 2 years, they all lived in the same apartment. That was a story I heard over and over, and I always remembered Berta's name. So over the years, I know Mom and Dad came to visit. In 1969, they stayed with Berta. There was correspondence going back and forth and Christmas cards, and everything was good. As Mom grew older and Dad and medical issues, obviously those correspondence kind of diminished. So both of my parents passed away in 2007. And a year or two later, John and I took a trip to Europe and spent 3 or 4 days in Vienna. And I had paperwork. I had report cards of my mom from the school she attended to. I had her baptismal certificate of where she was baptized. And I just very much had a longing to find these places and try to trace my mother's early life. So I was finding all of these places where Mom had been, and I was so emotional, and I was tearing up, and I'm like, my mama walked on these streets, and I just had such a desire to follow her footsteps. Then a few years went by and we had become very connected with our Luxembourg family in Luxembourg and had begun to travel, and it just made me feel like this is the time. I need to do what I can to find my Austrian family. So I'd look through some of the old letters that we still had, and there was an address for Berta, and that was the address I decided to try. The letter was 40 years old. It was actually a Christmas card. But I knew that oftentimes people in Europe do stay at the same addresses or even the families later, so I thought it was worth a try. I wrote a letter, said who I was and all of the names I was looking for, someone either in the Vosi family, the Charm family, the Sufal family, the Kladensky family. After I read it over and proofread it, I'm like, I think I'll add an email address as well. So that was an afterthought, and it was a good thing. The letter was mailed on July 5th, I believe, and on July 27th, lo and behold, an email appeared. This is the first email. So Berta had received the letter, and the email that came from Ferdi said that she received the letter and she had passed it down to him. He remembered packages from Grandma. It was like Easter, birthday, and Christmas all in one, and he remembered bazooka bubblegum and a warm robe, and it was just such a wonderful letter, and I responded to him right away. And the next letter, email letter, he sent me a photo, sent me this photo that had been on my wall for 60 years maybe already, and he said, "Who's who?" And then this was the picture that he sent, please who's who. So as Ferdi and I began to correspond, of course, his language was German and mine was English, but when the emails came from Ferdi, they had an attachment, and I presumed that attachment must have been Google Translate. So I would go to Google Translate and put the German pieces in, and I'm presuming he's going to Google Translate and putting the English in. And that went on for a while, but eventually Google Translate did drop out of the picture. But it was really a wonderful time, and we're very grateful for Google Translate because they helped us in those early emails to get the full understanding of what each of us was sharing with the other. That was all very emotional. It was very good, I think, for both of us to learn a lot of details, and for him to know that we never really forgot our Vienna family.
I didn't really know anything, actually. Like, everything I know now, everyone always told me after we guys reconnected with you. So I didn't even really know that there was family that left during Second World War to go to the US. So that was a huge surprise.
Ich wusste das von Erzählungen von deinem Opa, dass es in Chicago eine Familie gibt, Verwandte von uns. Und da hat es eine Tante Margret gegeben und eine Tante Anna und einen Onkel Henry, oder? Ja, Henry.
I didn't know a lot because I only knew that there are two aunts. One was Margaret and I think one was Anne.
Die Tante Berta, die Schwester vom Opa, hat Besuch bekommen. Das sind die Verwandten von Amerika zur Tante Berta gekommen. Die Tante Berta, eine Schwester vom Opa. Und da wurden wir auch eingeladen. Und da habe ich das erste Mal die Familie kennengelernt. Deine Mutter, die Ellie, war damals 3 Jahre alt.
And they visited us when I was a little girl. And my mother, she's not able to speak English, told me the aunts from Chicago will visit us. And she was really nervous. And I remember Aunt Margaret. And I remember I had a doll, and after the visiting of Margaret and Anne, I named my doll also Margaret because of the aunts.
Und die haben sich wirklich so gefreut und dadurch ist irgendwie eine Verbindung zustande gekommen, weil wir sie ja kennengelernt haben, nicht? Und dann haben wir ja einige Jahre nichts gehört.
And then I didn't hear anything about the American family. Long time.
Und irgendwie über den Onkel Ferdi und wieder über die Tante Bertha war schriftliche Verständigung und so sind wir wieder näher gekommen der Familie. Ne?
So fast forward now to the spring of 2017, my first cousin Josh and I were both attending Miami University in Ohio, and we're spending this semester studying at our satellite campus in Luxembourg. Now, this campus was a very big reason why the two of us wanted to go to Miami to begin with, because we grew up very in touch with our family heritage from Luxembourg. My great-grandfather Anthony Schroeder, who was the husband of my great-grandmother Margaret, was born in Chicago to Luxembourg immigrants, and he was a very adamant preserver of his heritage. When I was in high school, me and a few of my family members reclaimed our Luxembourg citizenship, and now I have a passport and an ID and everything. So I knew a decent bit about my Luxembourg side of the family tree, but to this point in my life, the only thing I really knew about my Austrian heritage was that my great-grandma was born in Vienna and she came to the US as a child. That was pretty much it. So Josh and I had an extended break over the Easter holiday, during which my dad, my uncle, and my grandparents all came out to visit us. We were to spend the holiday in Luxembourg and then head to Vienna to meet with this newfound Austrian family that my grandma had somehow miraculously reconnected with. A family that I had only recently found out about maybe a few months prior to this. And to this point, I had no idea about the depth of the communication that my grandma and Ferdy had been having at this point for almost 3 years.
So as we planned our trip to Europe, and I was in correspondence with Ferdy, and he was just so welcoming and offering every way that he could possibly help us. But when I saw Ferdy, I mean, it was the first thing we had to do was give each other a big, huge hug, and just kept smiling and smiling. And of course, he's speaking German and I'm speaking English, but it didn't matter. We were just having a good time being together. He was so gracious to arrange for what he called a family meet.
I do remember feeling pretty excited to meet this family. I grew up in a very family-oriented environment, surrounded very often by my cousins and my aunts and my uncles. So when I found out that we had extended family across the Atlantic, I was excited. I was very excited. But I was also a little nervous about how receptive they would be of us, the Americans. Those who know my family well know that we can be a rather rambunctious group. So I just wasn't sure how receptive they would be to that. And yeah, that turned out to be the most outlandish concern that I could have possibly had.
Naja, ich habe gesagt, ich möchte unbedingt beim Treffen dabei sein. Ja, und so haben wir uns ja, im Apostelkeller getroffen.
I was like so excited because like I went to school with a bunch of kids who had like parents from one place and then parents from another place, and they grew up like bilingual, they know 2 languages, they have family in like 2 different places. And I was like so jealous of that because like I loved learning languages, and I was like, it would be so cool to have family somewhere else. So at that time I've never been to the US, and I was like, that's so cool, I'm like so excited.
And when we got there, we were a little bit surprised to see how many were there.
And then I met all of you guys, and I was like, that's like so cool, I have family in the United States, like how cool am I?
I remember we had one huge table with the adults concentrated on one side and the kids were on the other side. 3 generations of now reunited family in the same room for the first time ever. Both my grandma and Faraday had brought with them a bunch of old postcards and letters and artifacts that they and their generation of first cousins were all exchanging. Then there was my dad and my uncle and their generation of second cousins helping bridge the language gaps. And then from my generation, there were 5 of us kids, the third cousins. It was me and my cousin Josh from the US, and then Clara, Paula, and Paul from Austria.
My 2 young grandsons, and Polly and Clara were there, and Paul, and they just seemed to instantly have just a connection. And they were on the one end of the table, and they were just chatting. Of course, they're all so good at English.
If I recall, the Hyplicks had just gotten back from a trip to Thailand, and me and Josh had been traversing around Europe at that point for a few months now, so there was certainly no shortage of things for us kids to talk about. The whole thing was like something out of a movie. It was such a cool moment to be a part of.
Then in the following year, 2018, we were fortunate enough to be able to return to Europe again and had a wonderful, wonderful time. Now we were all old friends. But it was a wonderful time, and just have so many fond memories of it.
And now you come to Austria, visit your mother's town, and we hope so much, feel the mystical touch from the lovely and golden Vienna.
I think what makes this particular family connection so special is that we all share this heightened sense of appreciation for what it took to get us here. An awareness of how slim the chances were that all of this would be what would come of that one letter that my grandma sent. To think that she almost went her entire life without ever knowing her first cousins, as someone who grew up so close to mine, that's what gives me pause to sit back and reflect on how precious this time that we have together truly is. Because it was never guaranteed. And it was so close to never even happening. I mean, Berta was 91 years old when she received that letter from my grandma. She could have passed away decades before that, and we would have had no idea. And that gateway to the rest of the family would have been closed forever. So we all understand that, and we all feel the same way. And that's what I believe is the reason for all of this excitement that we have surrounding these newly rekindled lifelong connections.
I feel so honored to be invited to the wedding and being able to celebrate Christmas with all of you. And I remember going over to Aunt Julie's house around Christmas time, and we had pasta and all that stuff that night. And I just walked in, and I haven't seen her since I got to the US at that time. And I walked in and she was like, hello, and I felt so at home, even though I've never been to this place. It's so surreal to have people that you meet and have never met before but feel so close to. I don't know, how cool is it that we have this huge family and we can all go to the US together and then come back to Austria together, and it's really, really cool. It's so fun.
I'm just very grateful that it all worked out and we have a continuing relationship. I'm especially happy to see all of us cousins, grandkids, really being connected, getting to know each other in this world of travel where they can really be together as often as they like to be.
And especially perfect is that you young guys are so familiar to each other and you're so cute. And today I said to Julie, we're one family, and that's wonderful and perfect.
So after all these years, my thought was of my grandmother, to see her family being separated all these years, once again reunited. It was just really a wonderful thing. I just felt like Grandma's really happy. I'm a grandma still.